Welcome to this edition of Locker Room Chat, brought to you by the Tacoma Pierce County Sports Museum and Rainier Asphalt and Concrete, the number one asphalt and concrete repair contractor in the Tacoma, Seattle area. For quality workmanship, top-notch customer service, contact Rainier Asphalt at rainierasphalt.com. Let them know you heard about them on Locker Room Chat, and today we have a fun one for you. We're going to talk some Tacoma Twins. That was the Tacoma club in the early to mid-'70s. We have a star player from that era here. We have a collection of bat boys from that era, and we're going to share some very fun stories along the way. And I thought we'd start. Let's go around the table, introduce yourself, and let's take it from the beginning. How did you start with the Tacoma Twins? Bruce, why don't you start us off? We'll go around the horn.
How did I start? Well, going to school with Steve, and we were good friends, Nacarado, and he just came up, said one day, you want to be bat boy for the Twins? I said, sure. So sign me up. So that's how I started there.
John, when did you get your start?
Man, I started actually as a ball shagger, and because I had friends that were bat boys and stuff, I was lucky enough. I was 12 or 13 when I started there, and I remember my interview with Stan Nacarado. He talked to me for a little bit, and then I had friends that were bat boys and ball boys. My brother was, and so I was just, so excited when one of them couldn't make it or took sick, and they asked me to fill in for him, and it was just a lot of fun. If I would have known Eddie Bain was there, I might not have done it, but I'm still in therapy for a few pranks he pulled on me, but it was a lot of fun, just a lot of fun. I remember as a ball shagger, I just sat behind the stadium and waited for foul balls to fly over the top, and would then retrieve the balls. And I got 50 cents a ball when I got one. So, but a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
Tom, what about you?
Well, I'm here mostly as a surrogate for my brother John, who was the visiting clubhouse boy there from 73 to 77. And I think he got the job. Sam Adams can clarify this for me. I'm pretty sure he got the job through Dr. Adams. Dr. Adams was the team doctor for the Twins for a long time. And I'm pretty sure that Dr. Adams must have played a role in Johnny getting the job there, and I would help him out occasionally. I would assist him, or sometimes when he wasn't there, he played football at stadium, and sometimes there'd be a conflict, and I would come in and fill in for him until he was able to make it over to the stadium. But that's how it started.
Steve, you had a natural in.
Yeah, I'm the Nepo baby of the crowd. I think the guy before me, Steve Johnson, he probably still has it out for me to this day. But funny enough, I was when the season started, I was actually in Hawaii, and so John kind of had to fly solo. I came in about 3 or 4 days into the first homestand, but for a 16-year-old kid, their first job, being raised by ball players that, looking back, weren't that much older than us at the time, but for 16, getting your job as that clubhouse attendant was probably the best job a 16-year-old in Tacoma could have.
What about you, Marshall?
So, my story is Mike Cheeseman or Marshall?
Marshall. It's Marshall.
Marshall. Sorry about that. Nice background.
No worries. Well, thank you. My story is similar. I grew up on Browns Point. I've known Steve since junior high, and actually my brother Mark, who is Steve's age and a friend, started as the bat boy in 73 for, I think, the first 3 homestands, and then he got better paying, more consistent work, so I was able to slide in as the bat boy, and I was bat boy in 73 and 4. And I can remember when John was shagging balls, but you didn't shag the one that hit the windshield of my car out there beyond first base, John. So I don't know about your skills, but then I worked in the clubhouse from 74 on, and John and I worked part of the season or most of the season the last year together in the clubhouse. And as Steve said, it was just so much fun for a kid to have those experiences and meet those people, good or bad. They weren't that much older than us. So at 16, 17, 18, we were hanging out with these guys that, it was the 70s and it was an interesting time. And I know this is a family show, so we won't go too deep into those, but we grew up a little bit faster, I think, than the average teenager.
Sam, how did you get your start?
Well, I had an in too. With my dad was the team physician for the Giants and the Cubs, and I actually started with the Cubs in '69, and then 69, 70, 71. And I thought 72 was the first year of the Twins.
It was.
It was. That's Steve. Isn't that when we were, because Steve Johnson was the visiting clubhouse boy for the Cubs.
Yeah.
And then when Stan took over the club and the Twins came in, I thought you and John were the visiting. So, and Marshall, you started in 72, right?
Yeah, it was 72, not 72.
72,
Thank
yeah.
you for the correction. Yes.
So
Right.
I haven't thought about this in a while. So I started thinking about it and got online to remember exactly what years I was working for the Cubs. And then when I moved up to the clubhouse boy the first year, and I can't remember, was Kuzminich with me on the first year?
Yeah,
Frank?
he was.
And then the second year it was you and me, Marshall, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So,
so I had a nice in. So although Steve mentions Steve Johnson was slated to was kind of when you're a marked man with Steve Johnson. I was slated for the visiting clubhouse with the Cubs.
Oh.
So anyway, and then but no, visiting home, it was such a good time. So
yeah,
Mike, what about?
Too bad Frank wasn't able to be here for whatever reason. He opted out. But sophomore year, he was my best friend in high school, and so he got the job. And if I recall correctly, he got fired for somehow one of the jerseys ended up in going home with him and didn't come back, and somebody found out about it. Is the story I recall. I could have dreamt that as well, but I think that was what happened. But he was a great guy. I'm sorry he's not here to share some stories, because he has a few for sure.
Yeah.
Mike, how did you get your start?
I had a friend of mine, Chuck Hawkins, who was one of the ball boys for the Twins in 1972. And he couldn't make every game, so he would oftentimes call either myself or another friend of ours, Tom Gallo. And in 73, both Tom and I went to work as a ball boy, Tom as the bat boy in the Twins dugout. Eddie Bain was everybody's hero back then. And let me see, I just remember Buck Chamberlain was the one guy who interviewed me.
Oh, yeah.
He was fantastic. I think he supervised all the bat boys and clubhouse staff.
Yeah, Buck loved Chuck.
Yeah, Buck was a great guy. And I saw Tom English on. Tom wouldn't remember me, but your brother I was a visiting bat boy in 74, and he was a visiting clubhouse guy, and he was just such a great help. Both he and Marshall took care of the players better than anybody could have. Just had a great time. I loved being a bat boy. Friends from school would come down and talk to me, and you could just tell by their eyes that they kind of I sure wish I was helping you out. So that was kind of neat. It was just a great time. I talked to Steve a couple years ago, and it was the time of our lives, I think is how Steve phrased it. And I couldn't agree with him more.
Eddie, it's great to have you here. You won 38 games in a Twins uniform through 4 seasons. What do you remember about those days?
Well, this is really cool to see the faces and names I haven't been around for a long time. I came to the Tacoma Twins when Calvin Griffith sent me to the minor leagues out of spring training and told me I wasn't good enough to pitch in the big leagues. So I started off in Tacoma on a different tilt. When I signed in '73, they took me right to the big leagues. And so my first exposure to minor league baseball was in Tacoma. And as many crisis moments as I must have delivered to some of the bat boys, they probably delivered a few to me also.
Steve, you touched on a Jersey incident or a bat boy got fired. Somebody, and it triggered a story in my mind about Rod Carew's bat. Who can tell me the story about Rod Carew's bat?
That would be me, actually.
Yes.
It was, I can't remember the year. It was either 74 or 75. And the big Twins came to play the Tacoma Twins. It was great for me because, hey, I got to wear their baby blue uniforms. That was awesome. Otherwise, I would be in grays. But, you know, the Twins had Killebrew, Carew, Oliva. In that game, at game's end, my responsibility was to log the bats from the dugout to the visitors' locker room so they could be packed up and taken to the next destination. I think the Twins' next game was in Oakland against the A's. The great thing about the Bat Boys room was that it was right next to the visitors' locker room. And so, knowing that this was probably like a once in a lifetime opportunity for me, I kind of hatched this plan that I was going to, on the way to the visitors' locker room, I was going to put Rod Carew's bat into the Bat Boys room. And everything went perfect. I was able to go home that night. I probably slept with the bat. Was just he was just such a great baseball figure at the time. Fast forward to the very next day, though, who was in the Bat Boys room when we arrived? Tom Gallo and myself was the boss of bosses. Stan Nacarado was
Oh boy.
He was not happy at all. He wanted to know what happened to Rod Carew's bat. He was had just had a phone conversation with the Minnesota Twins traveling secretary from Oakland, and he said he got his ass chewed. Apparently, Carew was extremely superstitious and in the middle of a hot streak and did not want to change his bat in mid-streak. We, of course, just played innocence and said, hey, I don't know what happened. And I can't say that he was entirely convinced, but I remember taking it home, showing it to John, my brother. The funny thing is, though, through the years, I have no idea what happened to the bat. So while it was a great treasure to begin with, I have no proof that it exists today. So yeah, that would be my story.
Carew's Louisville Slugger was a C243, and a very distinctive model of the Louisville Slugger. And I have one of the autographed bats if I could get it to you. So
yeah,
it wasn't the one you stole, but it was a different one.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah.
I think that was the last year Minnesota came down, that the big league came down to Tacoma.
Yeah. I ended up with somehow, I don't know how this happened, but when the big team would send their previous year or 2 year worth of uniforms down to the little club, and I would take infield sometimes with the team, go out, and Jim Van Wyck would work with me, and And I didn't even realize it at the time, but I was wearing Rod Carew's jersey because I was about 6'2" and 148 pounds. So that was one of the few that fit me. And so somehow I forgot to take it off. Apparently, it ended up at home, and the Twins were in town playing the Mariners in the dome, and I brought the uniform top out and I said, "Hey, Dad, if you're going to go down to the locker room, would you mind having Rod Carew sign this?" So he did. We got Rod's autograph on it. Never saw it again in my possession. Somehow it ended up framed in his office. I did get it back when he passed. I got his memorabilia, and along with it came that Rod Carew jersey.
Wow.
Well, you guys are all stealing from Rod Carew. I have a story that's the reverse of that. Of course, everyone loved Rod Carew, and when they would come into town for the exhibition games, I mean, it was Carew, Tony Oliva, Harmon Killebrew. These guys were like gods, to coming into Tacoma. They were legends. And Carew was still a great player in the 70s. Killebrew was near the end. Oliva, he could barely walk. They'd have to wrap him up. I remember coming into the locker the day of the exhibition game, and I was curious about seeing these guys for the first time. And the first thing I saw was Tony Oliva in the trainer's room getting his legs wrapped. And I mean, when Tony Oliva got his legs wrapped, it was from ankle to upper thigh. I mean, they just wrapped him up like a mummy. So he's there getting wrapped up. I remember the game I was at. Killebrew hit 2 home runs in that game. One of them that bounced off the top of the fence and over. I don't know how many of you guys remember that. And he was hardly even playing anymore. I think that was his last season. But Carew, so I'm there in the locker room, and I'm aware that these are major league players, which is kind of different. They kind of have a different attitude than the AAA players. And one thing is they expected to have an area to put their valuables, like a lockbox to put their valuables. That's kind of standard in the major leagues, but it's not standard in the minor leagues. So Steve will remember this. Steve and John there was a cupboard that they emptied out and said it was the valuables box, and they put a fake lock on it. And so everyone's rings and watches and all their valuables went into this box. And somewhere midway through the game, I noticed that the lock wasn't, it wasn't locked. The lock was just hanging there, but it wasn't locked. And I decided, well, I'll do everyone a favor and I'll lock the lock box. And it turned out at the end of the game that there was no key for that lock. So, and the Twins had a bus to catch. I mean, they were leaving town that night. So everyone was in a hurry to get it together after the game and get out of there. And finally, somebody says, I need to get my stuff in the lockbox. And the lockbox is locked and there's no key to the lock. They had to get a hacksaw and hack the lock off of there. And by now, everyone is making fun of me. Everybody in the place is making fun of me. I'm the one who locked the lockbox and is delaying the whole team from getting out of there. And so everyone, good-natured, everyone's giving me a good-natured ribbing. But when everyone in the locker room is giving you a good-natured ribbing, it doesn't feel that good-natured. And Carew saw this, and he came over to me when the others weren't looking. He came over to me, and he handed me $20. And he said, kid, don't let them bother you. And that's what I remember about Rod Carew was the kindness of that moment. He saw how embarrassed I was in that moment, and he bailed me out.
So, Tom, I have a story that dovetails to yours nicely that immediately precedes your interaction with him that night. So I remember it was May of '74 when they came in, and it had been raining all day. And they weren't even sure that game if they would get the game in. And, both teams normally take batting practice, but because it was raining, batting practice had been canceled. So I'm in my clubhouse, 4:30 in the afternoon, finishing up, putting uniforms away, whatever I had left to do. I was the only one in my clubhouse. John comes over. Marshall, I have to run over to Fred Meyer's to pick up some shoes. There was another team in town, but he had some shoes that were being repaired. He goes, I'll be back in about 20, 25 minutes. Nobody should come in, but I'm locking my clubhouse. So if somebody should come in, let him in, sit down. Sure, John. So I'm working. Just a couple of minutes later, I was in the trainer's room and I heard the door open and closed, and I figured it was Buck Chamberlain, because Buck was usually the second person after me to get there. So I finished up what I'm doing in the clubhouse, and here I'm a 17-year-old kid. I turn the corner and here's Rod Carew, Harmon Killebrew, and Tony Oliva standing in my clubhouse. They did not know, they did not get the word that batting practice had been canceled. So they took a cab together from the Doric, I think is where they were staying. And John's clubhouse was closed. So they wandered over to mine. So I'm kind of starstruck. Crew kind of started laughing. I think he saw the look on my face. So he came over and said, "Hi, I'm Rodney." And he introduced himself. I'll distinctly remember that as Rodney. And like you say, Tony Oliva was limping very badly. I know he coached first base that night, wasn't playing. And Harmon Killebrew was pretty quiet.
He pinched hit.
Yeah.
He got a hit.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be. So anyway, I just said, hey, John ran over, is running an errand, make yourself at home here. I've got a couple things to do. So, we had a big table in the middle of the clubhouse. So they sat down and started asking me questions about, how the players were doing and that type of thing. And Rod was certainly the most outgoing. Oliva spoke a lot of Spanish, and because Rod Carew grew up in Panama, he spoke Spanish too. So they spoke Spanish to each other, about some things. And again, Harmon Killebrew was pretty quiet. He asked me a couple questions, but then finally Rod said, "Hey, Marshall, do you have any Red Man?" And back in those days, as a clubhouse boy, we had a concession, coffee, pop, and of course we had tobacco products. This was in the 70s. So we had things like Beach Nut, Red Man, a few of the players smoked, and we'd go out to the Indian reservation and get the cheap, non-licensed or state licensed tobacco products. And I distinctly remember that. He said, "Hey, do you have any Red Man?" We were in New York and all they had was that Beach Nut crap, was what he said. And I just actually gone to the reservation. So I went in and grabbed 2 packets of Red Man. And I distinctly remember my price on it to the players was 40 cents. Because it was Rod Carew, I remember all this very vividly. So I was just going to give it to him, and I handed it to him and he said, "Oh, thank you so much." And I walked away. And just like with you, Tom, he grabs his wallet and hands me a $20 bill for 80 cents worth. And I said, "Oh, I'll get you some change." He goes, "No, you keep it." But that was probably the biggest memory of my childhood in terms of seeing 3 Hall of Fame players at once and me interacting with just them. John, unfortunately, came back way too soon. But it was about another 10 or 15 minutes and they went into the other clubhouse, but I'll never forget that moment. The only other things are my interactions with Eddie Bain are just about as explosive.
Writing a book, Eddie. So
Not quite.
But it was an amazing experience.
I'll finish up on Rod real quick. He came early. I'm sure he did that probably, that's the kind of pro he was, the guy to show up early and outwork everybody. And he was just a quiet, gentle gentleman that sat at the card table with us in the middle of the room. I think it was me and John and Tom. Were you there at that point?
Yeah, I remember it.
And we just sat and we talked baseball, and he didn't big shot us at all. And that stuck with me. And when I moved to LA, I drive down to the Big A when he was with the Angels. I drive down there just to watch him hit. Truly one of my favorite players of all time, to see what a artist he was at home plate. Wonderful memory.
Well, it's always something when you meet somebody who's that great at what he does, and he's also such a beautiful person, because he really was.
Yeah, he truly was.
This started with the Rod Carew bat story. If anyone else, the statute of limitations is over. So if anyone else has any stories who want to unburden themselves, this is the forum. Feel free.
You know,
I wanted,
I've
I
got
wanted
to
to
say
tell.
something on regarding the bat and my dad showing up. That is so my dad. You know, I don't know where he would have heard that initially, but if they hadn't called him, he would have been down there anyway and found it. You know, how do you think it was growing up, you know, as his son? There was no secrets. You couldn't hide from him. He knew everybody, and he got all the intel. So that's a funny story. I forgot all about the bat. I forgot all about the valuables, but it's coming back. And I remember sweating bullets that these guys were needing to hit the road, and that damn box was locked.
Can I tell a quick Stan story?
Yeah.
He for some reason I was with Stan for a long time, and entrepreneur Mike Veck, Bill Veck, Ethan Black, all those guys. That Stan was an entrepreneur in the minor leagues when the minor leagues wasn't quite ready for that. And Stan decided, I'm a very, very, as the guys that know me here, I'm a very hairy individual, not just on top of my head now, but my arms and everything. So Stan decided that I was Wolf Bane. Whatever, I still don't know why I was Wolf Bane, but I guess it was Wolfman, I'm hairy, all this and that. So, okay, and Stan was he did a great job of publicizing it for whatever reason, and I was having a decent year. And he said, Eddie, I got something ready for your next start, but just go along with it. Yeah, sure, Stan. So I go out to warm up, and there's some guy leaps out of an airplane, however high a parachutists jump out of an airplane. This guy floats over top of Cheney Field there and lands on top of the mound and hands me the ball to start the game. And he's got a giant wolf outfit on also. So it's Wolfman Bane 1 meets Wolfman Bane 2 or something. And it was just Stan, what a brilliant mind for being able to sell everything. And it was nice to see it come to fruition with one of my characters, I guess you'd call it.
Those were two of his favorite things in the world: skydivers and fireworks.
Oh yeah.
Well, he had the motorcycle jump that one time too.
Oh, we had my favorite was the clunker. Drive away this clunker at the end of the 5th inning. They tow a car out to the pitcher's mound, and if you could drive it away, you got to keep it and all the groceries that were in it.
Oh my
and
God.
sometimes the car wouldn't start up, and somebody'd come out and put the old Charger on it and start the car up and tow it off, and you got to keep the 55 Lincoln Town Car or whatever it was and a whole thing of groceries.
He had
Eddie,
all of the used car guys were his friends, and I remember the line that he would use when a particularly bad one would show up. He said, "Well, this one will make a nice anchor at the yacht club."
Hey, Eddie, this is Mike. I gotta just kind of add on a little bit to that last piece that you just shared. My brother John, who's one of the Bat Boys, he won the car.
Oh
And
yeah.
of course, he wasn't 16, so he couldn't drive.
No.
My dad's 6'2". That was a Ford Fairlane, by the way. And so he had to like push over all the groceries. It was half of it was filled with a taco shell, so it wasn't like real expensive stuff. But my dad had to drive that thing home, man. And we had to get rid of it because it, like you said, it just wouldn't start. It had no useful life.
Mm-hmm.
I think my brother inherited that car, and I think, as I recall, it died on him on 6th Avenue, and they had to have someone go get it. And the next day they turned it in. But you know what? There was a ton of groceries in there, and it was Manly's night. He had a promotion with the local store, and it was Manly's. And all our neighbors were happy because everyone got groceries. My parents were going up and down giving everyone groceries. So it was pretty
does
fun.
anyone remember the promotion when they would let all the kids out on the field and a helicopter would fly in and dump a bunch of numbered ping pong balls? I think it was. Steve, do you remember this? They drop it from the sky on top of the kids, and then the kids would fight for the ping pong balls, and certain numbered ping pong balls would win prizes and whatnot.
Yeah, Dr. Adams had to be on standby then, dragging a couple into the dugout, for a little first aid. But yeah, I mean, he had just so many different, Christmas in
July.
July.
Or
in July, Christmas in July.
Yeah. And then, again, here comes Santa Claus from 8,000 feet, out of an airplane. Frank Colarusso used to always remind us his favorite line there, cast your eyes skyward. And then he would narrate, they're all out of the plane, he'd narrate, the smoke was coming down. He absolutely loved it. They were the Funfield skydiving team, and they did it. I don't know. I think he kept them in business for 20 years.
Right. Steve, my favorite one was when the guy didn't land on the field. He landed over the left field fence. Out by the...
Yeah. Remember Max Patkin came every year. Clown Prince of baseball. Bob Feller came one year, Hall of Fame pitcher. And I do remember the time, I think his name was Rex Blackwell, where they jumped the buses. It's back when Evel Knievel was big. Yeah. And he jumped the buses in the outfield and just barely made it out the exit on the other. I mean, Stan truly was the Bill Veeck of the minor leagues at the time, and didn't Tacoma lead either attendance or sales in the minor leagues a couple of those years, Steve?
Season ticket sales.
Season ticket sales, yeah.
One of the promotions that didn't work out so well, it was all, KTAC night was one of the biggest nights of the year. That's when everybody would end up out on the roped off on the warning track. But Spanky Spangler went up the light stanchion over right field, climbed up there and dove out onto one of those, stuntman big blow up and missed it. Ended up breaking his back. I don't know how that ended up, how they didn't get sued into oblivion. Stuff like that you're just not going to see these days, along with like 10-cent beer night, which caused more than a fair share of headaches.
Yeah. The fireworks were always on the 3rd of July at Cheney Stadium, and it was always the fullest house of the year. And do you remember one year they lit off one or two and some sparks got in the box and they all blew up in the box? Do you remember that year?
Yeah, I remember it very well. In fact, some of them started heading out to the left field into the bleachers. And
that's right. They were just going from the box.
And
the thing about show was over in about 2 minutes. It was like, holy.
The thing about 4th of July is Stan told you who bought every firework before it went off, and this one's from such and such, and and it would take a little bit longer.
No, he never met a microphone he didn't like.
He had you in a gorilla suit at one time, I think, Sam.
Yeah.
I remember that, putting shoe polish on your feet in your gorilla suit.
In my hands. In fact, I think I put notes in that, Mark. You guys wouldn't do it. You guys wouldn't do it. So I got stuck doing it, and I think Steve, you and John went off and hid, and I got stuck doing it. And so I don't know if you remember, I ran around the stands during the game, but before the game, when I got all dressed up, and I think it's Spokane. I don't know if they were Spokane or Albuquerque, but the Dodgers team was in town. They were playing cards in the visiting clubhouse, and they're all sitting around, and Lasorda's there, and I can't remember the player's name, Puerto Rican or Hispanic player.
Davey
And he didn't
Lopes.
speak much English. And they told me to go in and scare him. And I went in and I went, God, I grabbed him. And he just went ape. He went nuts.
So to speak.
Nuts.
So to speak.
And he grabbed the bat and was chasing me. And I'm running out the down the hallway and out towards the field. And they had to hold him. I don't know if you remember that, Steve, but it was nuts.
I don't.
No.
I remember Stan being just so gracious, and anytime you messed up or whatever, as long as you were honest with him, he was right. He was in your corner. He would back you all the time. And the fireworks, you know, with him announcing, I know all the sponsors loved that. You know, Via Forest Deli.
Yeah.
This one's for whoever. But the other thing Stan told me on more than one occasion was he always wanted butts in the seats, and I always appreciated that, because he told me, he said, you know, an empty seat doesn't do us any good. It's not good for the players. It's not good for the fans. So he would run out, and I remember give out free tickets over at Fred Meyer before the games and things like that. And, you know, families that couldn't necessarily afford to go would come to the games and then maybe buy a hot dog and everything else. And Stan was just so good at that. And I know that's when they had the attendance records and, he, you know, KTAC nights and giving out tickets at all the stores. And, you know, people love that. You know, they could afford to go and take their family and buy them a hot dog or whatever. And Stan would always say, you know, if we don't give out the tickets or get them, an empty seat does us no good. So I always really, I learned a lot from Stan, but I always thought that was pretty special.
He'd always say, you know, you can't sell a hot dog to an empty seat, which is what you're
Right.
alluding to.
Yeah, I thought that was so cool.
Well, I got to thank you guys. You really cleared up something. I had this memory as a kid of sitting on the warning track with a rope around. And as an adult, I'm like, that didn't happen. There's no way I sat on the warning track. It was just you know, I was just a kid. I didn't remember it right, but that was a real thing.
Yep. He didn't want you would, you know, to turn somebody away at the gate. It wasn't going to happen if he was there.
Now, Gary, one thing that when those balls landed in that area you were sitting in, that was 2 more earned runs on my earned run average. Every time it could have been a fly ball to the left fielder, it was a double because it landed in your sitting room only morning track.
If I would have caught it, though, it would have been an out. So
yeah, I hope.
Yeah, but it was only one game a year.
Yeah, every time I pitched.
So as we all know, it tends to rain a little bit in Tacoma, you know, and it was hard sometimes to get all those spring games in. And if the outfield was really wet, Stan would get on the phone to Fort Lewis and they would bring a Huey helicopter in and they would hover over the outfield. Remember that, you guys? Did it a number of times. I think 3 or 4 times a year. Huey would come out and spend like a half hour trying to push the water off the outfield. And one time I was going from the clubhouse, we had to go up and get the players' mail up in the office. And I was walking across the field, getting the mail, and I got the mail and was coming back. And they landed, and the guy in the back seat, the Huey goes, do you want a ride? So I said, sure.
Wow.
Well, here I am with the players' mail sitting, you know, he strapped me in and they took off and they did a little bit. And then he went up and kind of flew around for a minute or two. And the pilots were talking and brought me back. And Buck was pissed because he came back and I'm on this helicopter with the mail. He's waiting for the mail this whole time. I'm out of the clubhouse. This was before batting practice, but you know, just crazy things like that. What are the odds you go to work and you get a ride in a military helicopter for
Marshall, he was mad because he was probably waiting for a love letter from Betty.
Could be.
Betty?
It's either that or it was all the paychecks they had to bring down there too.
Yeah, I know we've mentioned Buck, but you know, I have such a fond memory. John mentioned earlier, Buck Chamberlain was our trainer, and he was the person that was in charge of us all the time. And he had such an amazing personality, and he was such a neat guy. Talk about somebody with stories in baseball forever. And you know, Buck was just a fascinating character, but he was very caring. He really was good at his job. When I went away to WSU, I took some athletic training courses and learned how to tape and do some things. So the last couple of years, I'd help Buck do some of that. And Eddie Bain, you can probably remember this, is, you know, pitchers are kind of superstitious, right? So you get the alcohol rubbed down on your arm. So if I rubbed down Eddie's arm and, you know, he won the game and pitched well, he wouldn't let anybody else touch it as long as that streak was going on, right, Eddie?
Right.
Yeah, because there were a lot of times that, you know, somebody, hey, you need to go rub down, or if they'd lose, no, you can't touch me. You know, they'd go back to Buck. So I remember that distinctly as well, with the superstitions that the players had, but the pitcher specifically, I know you guys are creatures of, you know, you do it the same way each time when you're winning, and whatever you can do to change your luck. But Buck was an amazing guy, and I think we all have a lot of Buck stories. But I think we could call Buck the Milton Berle of the PCL.
Yeah.
He
Buck got a little robotic at times, and I was with him forever, right, in Tacoma. I think I had 4 years there. But Buck was rubbing me down before I was going to pitch one day, and did about 15 minutes with the alcohol rub down. Awesome job. And when he finished, I said, Buck, you do remember I'm left-handed, right? He had got my right arm ready to pitch the game.
Did he like Coors beer?
Yeah.
He could have a beverage or two, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who remembers?
traveling secretary, trainer. I mean, he did all the stuff that 5 different people do nowadays.
Yeah, he did.
They all did, though.
Mhm.
Yes, everybody. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Who remembers Joe Pepitone? I have a Joe Pepitone story.
Mhm.
Joe Pepitone. The nice thing about the visitors clubhouse, I mean, I'm sure the home clubhouse had all, you know, I went into the home clubhouse, I think once or twice, and it felt very strange. It was like an alien place. Everyone looked,
Yeah.
who's this guy? You know, it was clear you didn't belong there. But one of the things in the visitors clubhouse was, you know, the big stars would pass through, and it was kind of a tradition in the PCL that a lot of major leaguers would wind up playing with the Hawaii Islanders at the end of near the end of their careers, because, you know, who wouldn't want to play in Hawaii? And Joe Pepitone, who was a star with the Yankees and a lot of other teams, was near the end of his career, and he was playing with the Hawaii Islanders. And I was fascinated by the guy. He was kind of a poor man's Joe Namath in a way. He was a man about town. He had a lot of personality. He was an Italian from Brooklyn, and he wore wigs. He had a game wig and he had a street wig that he wore. So he was practically bald, but he'd wear these toupees and his hair was down to his shoulders so that he would look good for the lady. And I knew he was in town, and for some reason I was a little late to this game. The game had already started. So I come into the locker room and I'm like, I wonder which locker is Joe Pepitone's. And of course, there's only one locker there with a wig hanging on the hook in the locker. I guess that was his street wig, and he was out on the field with his field wig on. But that guy used to come in and sit at the card table and tell dirty stories. And he would do that every game. Every game he would sit down at that card table and start telling dirty stories, and everybody would go around just for that.
I gotta dovetail on that because it involves your brother. And he took Joe, gave him a tour of the laundry room, which was up underneath the stands where we did all the players' uniforms. And John had apparently some illegal substances that Joe was interested in. And so they would go underneath there, you know, every few innings and take care of business there. So Joe was a character. I remember when he was in town with the Yankees, and the one year, you know, we had the Seattle Pilots, and we were there sitting up above first base about, I don't know, 20 rows. and everybody was all over him, just heckling him. And I just remember, he'd give the old middle finger as he was adjusting his cap. And but yeah, you're right. There was some incredible players that came through. From Frank Howard, Stan Williams. There was names that we'd see on the roster coming through, and they would just they were on their way out. Some guys were okay with that, and some guys were expecting to hang on a little longer and try and get another year in the bigs. And certainly you never knew what to expect, with the next team that was coming in. And that's what we loved about the visiting team.
Yeah. Frank Howard, I got to tell a Frank Howard story because he was coaching, I think Spokane at the time. And, there was a ritual in the visitors clubhouse. I don't know what it was like in the winners club or in the home clubhouse, but in the visitors clubhouse, you would set up the locker room with the anticipation that the team was going to win. So you'd have the beverages, the beers, and everything out in the ice. And that was if they won. So when they won and they came in the locker room, it was like a party. You'd crank the music up, the beer would be flowing. It was a celebration. And when they lost, the tradition was no music, no beers. It was somber. It was like a funeral in there. And everyone would sort of play along with this ritual. You kind of had to. That's how it was done. And the Spokane Indians had been on a losing streak anyway. And they lost the game to the Twins, but they busted their ass. And it was like an extra inning game, and they gave everything they had, and they still lost the game. So the team floods into the locker room after the game, and Frank Howard says to us, "Turn that music up. Get that beer out. We're going to go out there tomorrow, and we're going to crush their titties off. We're going to crush their titties off." It was insisted that they celebrated like they had won, and I think they'd lost their 9th game in a row. That was Frank Howard.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I unpacked his bag. There was the manager always had that first locker to the right when you came in. If I'm right, recall correctly, his uniform top was size 54, and I put it on, and John took a picture of me. It literally went down past my knees.
Well, what was 6'8", 300 pounds?
One of the biggest men I've ever seen.
So Steve, there's also a picture that I took of you and John both in his pants. You were in one leg, he was in the other. And with both of you guys in his pants. And I remember, they had added probably 8 inches to the bottom. They'd taken the largest pair of pants they had and added, remember that at the bottom? There was a seam across there to make them long enough. I mean, yeah, he was the hugest man I had ever seen. One of the biggest arguments I ever saw a manager get into. We all remember Eric Gregg, our favorite umpire.
Yes.
Yep.
And he made a bad call. That was typical for him. Two or three calls a game were terrible. And Frank, I think he got kicked out of the game.
He did.
And then, so the umpire's room is, 5 steps outside of the visitor's locker room. And Eric comes in off the field, and Frank was waiting for him. He was so livid. He was screaming at the top of his lungs. And while he was yelling, he turned a complete 360 circle as he was screaming. I've never seen anybody go, and you're not supposed to do that. You're not, especially after a game. Certainly not touch. I was afraid he was going to rip his head off, and he could have.
Well, I remember Frank, and I remember that situation, just being a kid and how scary it was. And he was every name in the book. And then Frank started kicking the door, and his cleat marks, remember, they bolted the door shut. Yeah. Frank was trying to get in.
That's right.
In the umpire's room. Yeah, he was kicking the door, and those cleat marks stayed in there forever. Well, they ended up having to call the police, and the police actually came down and finally escorted him to his car out of the dugout. And the umpires were scared to death to come out of there. And they tried to paint over the door and all that, but the cleat marks remained because they were so indented in the door.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah, he was he was over the top.
Yeah, the umpires, their room was between the visiting and home clubhouse, and it was the home clubhouse boys' responsibility to take care of the umpires back then. And Steve mentioned Eric Gregg, who was, a longtime National League umpire, Randy Marsh, Jim Quick. It seemed like back then a lot of them were National League umpires. I know now they go to different leagues, but I remember hanging out with Eric Gregg specifically after games sometimes. Really nice, friendly guy. He called me a couple times in the off season. Once he was living in Philadelphia, to check in, see how I was doing. And the umpires never have a home game, right? They're always on the road somewhere. Yeah. And very, very interesting life. They'd have to rub up the baseballs before the game. And I can still remember, I think it was 3 dozen balls that they would rub up with a special mud from Georgia, I think it was.
Mississippi.
Mississippi, yeah.
Mississippi. Okay, yeah. Somewhere in the South. And if it was, if it had been raining, it was a wet game, they'd do 5 dozen balls. And, Buck would have me take the balls in sometimes, but we'd take care of the umpires just like the players. As a clubhouse boy, we were responsible for shining shoes, washing all the uniforms, that type of thing. And Steve also mentioned, so for the 2 clubhouses, there was 1 washing machine. So it was always a race between the home and visitors to get the first wash in, because that was the limiting factor on how long you'd be there that night. Steve, you remember, if a game was over at 10 o'clock, we'd routinely be there till 1, sometimes even 2 a.m. Shining shoes, cleaning the clubhouse, doing all those things. And double headers were hell for a clubhouse boy, because you always had to have a spread in between. They're usually on a Sunday. You'd have to, and if you had a Saturday night game, you'd be there at 6, 7 a.m., getting things ready. Those were very long days. I did dread double headers, but we did all of that stuff. My dad, I remember when I went into the clubhouse, he'd get mad at me if I was in bed at 11 o'clock, in the morning. Get up, you're burning daylight. and Daddy, you guys, I don't know if you remember this. So when I went to Washington State the last couple of years, there were a couple homestands that were played before, and I was over in Pullman. So my dad worked for a couple of the homestands for a couple of years. And after the first year, I came home and he came in and he said, I have to apologize for you. You can sleep as late as you want. I understand now. If you don't get out of bed till noon, I do. Because we did work our asses off when the team was 10-day homestand was usually what we would get, right? So it was 10 days of doing nothing but working at the ballpark. The nice thing was then you'd usually have 5 or 10 days to either work another job or relax or take it easy. But I remember those homestands were always intense. And if you had a 12 or 15-day homestand, those were even crazier. Because I know I was always happy when I packed everybody up and the bus came and they went for, some road games to get a little bit of rest. But
yeah, the extra innings too, just hated them.
Yeah.
So then I had to drive all the way back to Browns Point. You did.
Yeah.
Home at 2 o'clock. To this day, I'm a terrible typist. Still hunt and peck. I blame it on that job, because typing was my first class in the morning at Stadium. I show up half awake, trying to learn how to type. So
yeah,
those are some long nights.
The other bat boys, they're on this too. I can remember learning early on that if it's top of the 9th and you're up 10 or 15 runs, you still don't do anything to pick stuff up, right? That was just a rule. You could not go grab the bag and set it next to the helmets, or, you had to wait no matter how many runs you were up. So it was always, once the game's over, then you can do your thing. But I distinctly remember that as well.
I remember you guys sometimes would have such long days and that type thing that you'd have us polish the cleats and you'd give us an extra $5. which was double, what we were making. And sometimes we
Oh.
welcomed it, and sometimes it was like, oh, I want to get out of here too. But so we would help polish the shoes sometimes.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
remember getting in on the shoe polishing more than once
Yeah.
too. Steve and
Yeah.
Frank and John. Oh yeah, you want to give me a hand here? We get out. We
We
get
got
out
really good at that.
earlier, It's,
I have to, I don't know if you guys can see this with my screensaver, but Mark Blouse
No way.
did this a few years ago. It's a check for when I was a bat boy. And you guys remember
Oh
we
my
got $5 a night. So I think
Yep.
this is for $40. So this was probably a 10-day homestand. So I got $40. So Mark Blau was kind enough, I don't know, a few years ago, he found it somehow and sent this to me.
Wow.
But Stan,
Hey, that was a lot of money back then.
yeah, it was. I looked at my W-2 for that year and I made $437 at the
Yep.
ballpark.
that was a big summer.
Yeah.
The
No, you
Cleaned
didn't
up.
put his tip. You didn't put your tips on there.
Yeah, the clubhouse guys got tips, right? I mean, most of your money was from tips, right, Steve?
Yeah. So,
the club-
so the
Clubhouse, not bad boys.
No, you guys didn't get tips?
no.
No,
Well,
they
every
get,
once in a while, if they felt nice at the end of the series, they'd give us a little bit. But
Yeah.
for the most part, it was just that was clubhouse guys got paid.
only when Rod Carew came into town.
Yeah, right.
Steve,
Yeah,
I remember
look at
you.
Go ahead.
Steve, I remember you vividly one time coming to the ballpark, and I still remember this. I was so impressed. You had just bought a new watch with some of your money, but it was like a Pulsar watch, which had never seen a digital watch in my life. And you pushed the button and it lit up. I don't know if you remember that, but I was like, just like, oh, I want
No.
his job someday.
I gotta correct you. You didn't even have to push the button. You
No.
just flipped your wrist.
It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
It was like Star Wars.
Hey, Bruce, I'm curious. We've talked about some of the visitors coming in. We haven't heard about Albuquerque. Tell me about what you remember when Albuquerque and Tommy Lasorda would come in.
I can just remember. Well, I kind of got friended up with Ron Say because of the days. My dad coached basketball at Bellarmine High School in the '60s, and I ran around with him as basically as the manager or ball boy for all those years. But I can remember going when Ron Say was playing basketball at Mount Tahoma and watching him. And I mentioned that when he first came into Tacoma to play, when he was playing for Albuquerque. And he was nice enough. I mean, he remembered my dad. And then every time he would come back to town, he would remember me. And we'd reminisce and talk about it a lot. That's what I always remembered about them. And they basically became my favorite team. I mean, because I always look forward to those guys coming back to town.
They were the best tippers too.
Yeah, they were. But then most of them all went on and won the World Series the following years, with Lasorda.
Some great
That whole bunch. There was Yeager and those guys. There was a bunch of those guys on that team that just went on, and
Davey Lopes.
Lasorda as the manager.
Hey, Lopes, Yeager,
Hey.
Pachorik.
Right.
Yeah, Pachorik. And those guys, you got to remember that before they were at Albuquerque, they were in Spokane.
They were the first
Right.
And then I think the 73, I think is when they moved to Albuquerque. And if you look at that, you had mentioned all the greats at the end of their career, but that was a team that was packed
Oh, yeah.
with guys.
Yeah.
You know, Buckner was Buckner had left in 70. I think he went up in 70, but then you had Lopes, you had them all.
Mhm.
I mean, that
by
team was
Tommy
just
Lasorda,
packed.
too.
And
Jerry
Tommy
Reister
Lasorda.
was Jerry
Yeah,
Reister.
Lasorda ran the show.
And he would tell stories like crazy.
Oh,
Oh, he was
Yeah.
fantastic.
right.
The,
Yeah, that guy could talk. He was.
this isn't a twin story. I was a bat boy for the Cubs, and Buckner was Spokane was in town, and Buckner got kicked out of the game, and he's just swearing and cussing, and he played first base, so he grabbed his glove, and the warm-up ball was in his glove, and he gets into the hall and he starts up, and next thing I know, he throws the ball at the outer door, and it goes in. And if you remember, we had that glass with the wire mesh.
Yeah.
It's stuck in the glass. It's
Classic.
stuck in the glass, and you're just going, oh God. And we all scattered and got the hell out of his way. But no.
I can tell you about a quick Albuquerque story. It was John and I, it's one of our favorite teams. They were good guys. They were making more money than most.
Yeah.
And they would take care of us. But Lasorda would always want us to come out and open up the clubhouse early so he could throw early BP. And so we would do that, skip school, come out, let them all in. There was 3, 4, 5 guys that wanted extra batting practice. So Lasorda's pitching, John and I are out in the outfield, shagging balls. It was fantastic.
Was Steve Yeager's locker set up differently? Who was involved in that?
That was me and John.
Okay.
He thought very highly of himself, and so and I mean, I kind of can't believe like what smart Alex we were, and we gave it right back to them. But we would always set up 2 towels. We would fold them so it looked like a star, and we'd set that out. He liked it. But yeah, he was a unique guy. Kind of one of those guys that was acting like a big leaguer before his time, But yeah, those Albuquerque teams, like somebody said, they were, or Sammy said, they were packed with future stars, and I think they won the league more than once when I was there.
Now, if you want to look back though at some of the Tacoma Twins guys, Tom Kelly was my roommate there, and he ended up winning 2 World Series with the Minnesota Twins.
Right.
Yeah.
So he won more World Series than Lasorda did. So and we had Lyman Bostock, one of the finest players that ever played there. That Gene Mock, I played for him in Minnesota. One of the smartest baseball people I ever met in my life. He saw Randy Bass play and he said, he's no Harmon Killebrew, forget him. And Randy went over to Japan and hit more home runs than any players ever hit in their major leagues over there. So we had some pretty good players running through Tacoma also. Just none of us were good.
Yeah, Randy Bass also was a 2-time Triple Crown winner over in Japan, and won a couple World Series, and was actually MVP in their World Series, in their championship game. And
my 1-year-old son Jamie. I'm sorry, my 1-year-old son Jamie. I walk out of the shower one day when you guys probably should have been paying more attention, and Randy Bass had my son Jamie drinking out of a Coors Light can at 1 year old.
Hey, we didn't have light beer back then. It was just
whatever it was. It was
Heidelberg.
He was
Heidelberg.
No.
Yeah.
Heidelberg in the keg bottles.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we loved Tom Kelly. Tom was a wonderful guy, and it was so awesome to see him, with his success. Charlie Manuel also.
Oh, the grinder,
the World Series as a manager, and great
just
guy.
kind of, with Randy Bass too. He made the Hall of Fame this last year in Japan in 2023.
Awesome.
And kind of another thing about him was he went back home to Oklahoma, and he got elected to the Senate, and was actually the minority leader of the Senate. And he actually termed out, but he had a really successful time after baseball as well, which is nice when you follow some of them. But yeah, he was in down there and was a minority leader there for several
years.
Guys,
if I can give you a quick Randy Bass story. I had played one of my pranks on the team. I had left a wake-up call for all the guys to get up. Everybody but me in Spokane needed to be up at 3 o'clock because we were having a team fishing tournament. And I got some of the clubhouse guys and all the guys to play along with it, and it worked. And so we went on a road trip, and like somebody was talking about earlier, we went to Hawaii 3 times a year back then for 6 days. So we take off, we go to a road trip this happened in Spokane, and I get to the ballpark the next day. We're flying to Hawaii, and nobody retaliates at all. And I'm in 6 days in Hawaii. Nobody retaliates at all. We land the next day. We start a homestand. Cal Irmer's our manager, a real old school guy. I love the guy. He protected me a lot when I should have got my butt kicked more than once. But anyhow, all of a sudden, Randy Bass is standing next to me during batting practice out by the right field fence, and big Mike Pepping's on the other side of him. And Mike Pepping was 6'7", 250, as big as Frank Hondo Howard. And next thing I know, these two are standing right next to me. And the next thing I know, a rope flies over the right field fence. Some of the people may know this story.
Yes.
Bass and Pepping pick me up, carry me to the outfield fence, and tie my ankles up and and whoever's on the other side of the fence hoist me up to the top of the fence. So I'm hanging up from the top of the fence during batting practice.
Oh my God.
Cal Irmer, as everybody's talked about, the clubhouse is right next to the thing. And Cal Irmer walks out. He goes, "What the? Oh, that's Bane. F him." And he goes back in the clubhouse. And then I think he came back out about 5 minutes later and said, "Somebody cut him down." So they cut me down from the right field fence.
Eddie, you mentioned
I paid for my track.
Eddie, you mentioned Lyman, and another just beautiful guy.
Right.
Do you remember the day he got called up?
Oh yeah.
So I remember everybody loved it. Everybody was excited for him. You know, when that happened, it was a big deal. And I just remember he was getting ready to go to the airport, and he had purchased a mint green 3-piece suit from Matt.
That was Lyman.
Nice.
and he had his Panama hat on, and he was going to the big leagues, and we celebrated with him. And unfortunately, that was the last time we got to see.
Oh wow, boy, he could really hit. Lyman was the tragedy was horrible, but just a supremely confident hitter. Him and Carew were in the big league. I played in the big leagues with both those two guys at the same time, and they were both great hitters. But Lyman, supremely confident, swore that he had gotten 3 hits against me in college. One game, the game I faced him in college, and I said, "Lyman, that would have been kind of hard." And he said, No, I clearly remember getting 3 hits. And I said, "Well, Lyman, I threw a perfect game, so it would have been hard for you to have the 3 hits."
Was he at Long Beach State, Eddie?
Cal State Northridge.
Cal State Northridge. That's right. Yeah, thank you.
I was
those are the good small schools down there, the Fullertons and Northridges that can really play.
Yeah.
Eddie, you had like 19.
You mentioned
Eddie, you had like 19 strikeouts in that game, didn't you?
Yeah, it would have been hard for Lyman to get too many hits because I
was going to say you struck out 19 players in that game.
When they swung at the curveball in the dirt, Dave Winfield told me one time. He said, "Hey Eddie, remember when I used to swing at that curveball in the dirt?" And I said, "Yeah." Then you stopped doing it. You went to the Hall of Fame, and I went to being a scout.
I didn't know that you had thrown literally a perfect game, 27 up, 27 down.
In college.
No. I just read that the other day. I'm not sure how I stumbled across that. Maybe the research that we were doing for tonight. But that must have been a pretty phenomenal outing for you.
Steve, the weird part of it is that was the 50th year anniversary of that game. And so this can make me feel old, but so did that, the 50 year anniversary, there's a reason they don't have 75-year anniversaries, because we're not here.
I think we could speak
Nobody to play in them.
For everybody when we were all a little starstruck when you were coming to Tacoma, because you were the #1 draft choice in the nation that year, I believe.
I went right to David Clyde went right to the big leagues out of high school. Dave Winfield was in that draft. Robin Yount was in that draft. lot of mistakes taking me ahead of some of those. I got drafted ahead of Freddie Lynn. Can you believe how bad a scouting that was? Every time I ever see Freddie, I still remind him of it. So,
Well, you made the Hall of Fame, so you did all right.
I can claim the college one. Yep.
College and down there, that's awesome, man.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. Hey, this has been awesome for me. I'm sure all of us have enjoyed this a lot, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Eddie, one of the scariest things I know as a clubhouse boy, and it was, if a pitcher got shelled in a game, was, are they going to go in and tear up your clubhouse?
Right.
And,
exactly.
We've all seen a few clubhouses torn up from a bad pitching performance. And I can remember a couple of players, Steve Luber being one that comes to mind, tearing up my clubhouse.
Lubes, sure.
Several times that I was there extra to clean, replace things. It would be crazy. And you'd be afraid to even walk in the clubhouse because you'd hear all this stuff flying.
Yeah.
You couldn't go in and say anything. So, I'm sure you've experienced a few of those.
I usually yelled at, and because he would listen to it, I usually yelled at Cal Irmer because I knew he was always wrong to take me out of the game. So even though now I know he wasn't, but I took my anger out, hopefully most of the time on him.
Tacoma wasn't the easiest place to pitch either. I mean, the weather, very rarely did you have, short sleeve weather to go out there. The springtime were cold and wet. And the ballpark, fortunately, the balls didn't fly out of there, which was great if you were pitching it. As a hitter, they didn't love Cheney Stadium too much.
Yeah, the air was thick, Steve, and fortunately, it was a real nice hitter's ballpark until Gary showed up setting a warning track. When he showed up and said that increased. We played in Sacramento. You guys know this. The left field fence was 232 feet to left field. I think it was Steve McCartney hit 53 home runs and didn't lead his team in home runs.
I remember that.
Miss your rotation.
Yeah, I always wanted to be the sixth starter on the 5-man trip through Sacramento.
That's it.
Unfortunately, your guy's favorite guy, Steve Luber, always seemed to be the guy that got skipped when we went to Sacramento. I'm not saying anything, but just I'm saying. Sorry, Lubes.
Yeah, he wasn't the most popular guy.
No.
No comment.
We skipped over Buck a little bit. Not too many stories got told about him, but a couple quick ones. I took a road trip with him to Spokane. Eddie, you mentioned he enjoyed his Coors. They didn't sell Coors in Washington State back then.
Yeah, good Idaho.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I threw that out.
With Coors beer, he would load up a bat bag full of Coors, and he'd share them with us every once in a while. It was a treat if you got to get a beer from Buck. But he also, I never got to thank him, but he got me a job when I moved to LA. Stephen Bochco, who was the producer of Hill Street Blues, did a you remember a baseball program, a baseball show, Bay City Blues. And so a friend of mine happened to be Bruce Paltrow, Gwyneth's dad. He used to come into the restaurant that I worked at all the time. And so he heard that I was interested in being a writer. And so he got me an interview for the Bay City Blues TV show. And David Milch, who was his head writer and became a very well-known producer on his own with what's the Tombstone?
Tombstone
on HBO. Great guy, great writer. So he takes me to lunch, and I'm telling him stories about from the inside, what happens in the locker room. And Tom, you kind of broke the ice there with dropping the F-bomb, but I won't go so far as to to tell the whole story. But I told him the story about when Buck would, two beers deep, and the players would start asking him after he came out of the shower to show his special talent.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh
So
my God.
I
didn't think anyone would bring this up.
Yeah.
I tell this story to David Milch. He says, "Hang on one second." He gets up and he walks across the other side of the restaurant, and I look over there at Stephen Bochco having lunch, and I see Milch lean down and whisper in his ear, and I get one of these from across the restaurant from Stephen Bochco. So thanks to Buck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I got hired, and the one and only time I got hired in Hollywood.
Good.
That's awesome. And Eddie, I got to thank you, because when I worked over there, if you had a good year and Stan felt you did a good job, he would let you go on a road trip a couple of my years, and over to Spokane and to Portland. I was able to make a trip over the two different years, but Eddie was my roommate. So he had agreed that I could stay with him. I don't know if you remember that, Eddie.
Yeah.
But had a great time. And I remember you got tired of me and you told me, "Hey, here's $5. Go get lost."
Yeah.
Here I am in Spokane.
What a great, you're a great babysitter.
Down to the arcade. And but anyway, it was very gracious of you, and I have great memories of our times, and I do think about you often, and I'm glad you're doing so well. But I certainly appreciate it.
I wonder what I was doing when you were gone with my $5 though. So
I had a pretty good idea, but
yeah,
I was just happy to have $5 in my pocket.
What a
Wallace,
roommate.
Idaho wasn't that far away.
Yeah.
Hey, did somebody get stuffed in a bat bag? Do I remember this?
Yeah, that would be me. And Eddie was probably part of that as well. I don't know if he remembers it, but Randy Bass and Mr. Pepping, they got a hold of me, and they were pretty big, and I was pretty small. In fact, Eddie's nickname for me, because he was Wolfman, was either Meat or Bones. He always called me that.
Yeah.
Hey, Bones, go get me or Meat. But they stuffed me in a bat bag and sealed the bat bag and locked it up. And they did it a couple of times, but I remember that one night, I don't know if it was on July 3rd or what, but it was a packed house there. And right before the game or the singing of the national anthem, they stuffed me in there and then trotted me out to, as I recall, between the pitcher's mound and home plate, and just dropped me in the bat bag.
Yeah,
the crowd is like, "What the heck is going on?" And they left me. And so now I've got to play Houdini and try to get out of that bat bag. And when I do remember finally getting out and struggling to get out, and actually got a nice ovation from the crowd. And a nice ribbing. And so as I recall, I think that's why I'm claustrophobic now. And I see a therapist often about that. But no, it was it was all in good fun. And I know that I remember quite a few pranks like that, whether it was being stuffed in a bat bag or bubble gum on my head with a bubble blown, walking around not knowing it's there as I run around talking to people. But and I remember some of the pranks on Eddie, as well as the fence, which I was worried about you, buddy. And
I know.
You had a couple of hot feet, I believe, and some other things, players getting you. But really, really good memories. But that was a good one.
That was classic.
Is there, we've touched on a lot of stories. I don't want to leave anything unturned here. Is there one we didn't get to? Is there anything that we've missed? I mean, I'm sure there's a lot, but
Eddie was always one of my, very favorite players, just because how he was. And I know he did a lot over at ASU and a lot of scouting afterwards. I followed him and was tempted many years to get a hold of him. And then another individual was Jimmy Van Wyck that was really good to me. I went on to be the clubby over for the Yankees when they came into town one year. And I know Jimmy went to work for Stan, but Jimmy was just always so nice. same type thing, had a bad day, or he would help you out, whether it was in the clubhouse or being a bat boy. And Kurt Russell used to come to the games to see Jimmy.
Yep,
So
exactly.
I met Kurt Russell a few times, and then Jimmy, while he was there, ended up getting married, and actually went to the wedding with Kurt
Yep.
Russell, which was
exactly.
really was really special. And of course, Jimmy went on. Do a lot of production stuff. He's a producer down in Hollywood and did many, Lethal Weapon and Armageddon and many Burt Reynolds movies. But I remember when he got his first gig, because he came and talked to me, and Kurt got him a job at going to an interview for Coca-Cola, I think it was, or Pepsi, whichever one. And Jimmy got the job, and he told me it was because they liked the way the bubbles rose when he tipped the bottle. But again, just another really good guy, and I have fond memories of him as well.
Van Wyck and I went out one night in Sacramento with Kurt Russell, right? And this is before Kurt was Disney famous, but he wasn't famous like he was later on.
Right.
So me and Van Wyck swore that at 2 a.m, Kurt Russell was running around this little bar in Sacramento, telling every girl he could meet, I'm Kurt Russell. I'm Kurt Russell. You should know me. I'm Kurt Russell. So we held that one over his head a little bit. I think Jim might have used it later on.
Yeah, I think he razzed him quite a bit. And one other thing I remember is when Ken Still, who I became really close with over the years, would come to the game. And Kenny, I remember Ken thought it was pretty funny. And obviously he had Sandy Koufax was Ken Still's best man in his wedding. And I think all baseball players thrive to be golfers, and golfers all thrive to be baseball players. But I remember Kenny signed a one-day contract with, and I believe it was the Twins. And he signed the one-day contract and came down and thought he was going to boss everybody around. But he signed that contract for $1, I believe it was, if I recall. And
he got us on a lot of good. He got us on a lot of good golf courses in Tacoma. There, I'll tell you, we played some nice places.
Right.
And
so some good memories there.
Now at his home course at Fircrest.
Oh yeah, Fircrest. Wow.
Yeah,
we didn't belong anywhere near that golf course.
I was playing there about a month and a half ago, and I was coming into 9, and sculled one out of a trap and almost hit him. It's it's about 20 yards, right of the green. Had to walk past him and dig it out of the bushes. But Kenny would call my dad 2-3 times a day, and they had such a great relationship. The number of sporting events that I went to with Ken, I don't know if there was ever a bigger sports fan than Ken Steele.
Yeah, man.
I remember being at his house, visiting him frequently, but he was real good friends with Lou Piniella too. And this is kind of off, but he'd gotten a card from Lou Piniella when he was in Chicago, and it had the emblem on it. It was a Christmas card. And in the card, Ken opened it while I was there. And even in the card, it said, if I would have got that one more player, he goes, I know we could have won in Seattle. But it sounded like he wouldn't let him get this player, whoever it was. But Lou was still talking about it when he was over in Chicago. So just an interesting person, Kenny was. But that was funny when he got real close with Stan, of course.
Yep. Guys, I'm going to need to get going here pretty soon. I've got some grandkids I still got to call.
So good to see you, Eddie.
Great to see you, Eddie.
I really enjoyed this. Thanks for involving me. It was really cool. Really cool. Thanks, guys.
Eddie, I'll reach out. I'd love to catch up sometime. But
please
thank you for
everybody.
everything.
You guys have my emails and phone numbers now. Call.
I will definitely, Eddie. Thank you so much. Thanks for being a good friend and a role model to me over the years. A good one. But thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Bye bye.
Well, I was a clubhouse boy 72 and 73, but what really amazed me was Steve and John kept contact with all these ball players, and there were many times when I'd meet up with them in 70. When was your last year there, Steve? And next thing you know, we're at the bar across from the old Temple Theater where these guys would stay at the Doric. And John's called me up and said, "Hey, get down here. We're down at the Doric." And you know, we're like, I'm like a freshman in college, and and we're meeting up with all these guys that were either still with the team or a visiting team had come into town, and we'd go down and have a couple underage cocktails with them.
Yeah, Terry's Tavern, I believe it was called. Yeah,
nice.
we played a little shuffleboard, had a few beers there with the ball players. I mean, there's no way I looked anything close to 21.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, John and I, it's hard to put into words. We lost John a couple years ago. But to me, he was family, and I'm only sorry that that he missed this. That I mean, the toughest thing would have been us trying to tell any stories and get a word in edgewise. John didn't have an off switch once he got going, but
he could
we
tell
had
a
to do
good
this
story.
for days.
But I got to say in closing that we shared some incredible moments. We go back so far. It's so good to see you guys. Bruce, I don't think I've seen you since high school. And we were thick as thieves in your little VW, and you working at Frisco Freeze, and us coming up after a ball game on Friday night. And it's been fun seeing you where you went from driving a taxi to being a New York Times best-selling author. And I don't know how many options on your books have been taken out to make movies of. I don't know if one has been made yet, but I hope one day to get to New York and hang out with you at one of those jazz clubs. I mean, that'd be a dream come true for me.
Well, I want to say one thing about the club, because the clubhouse and the ballpark and all that, because I was an interloper. You guys were all employees there, and I would come in occasionally, and everyone was so friendly. I think that there's something about the atmosphere of a ballpark and people who work at the ballpark. It's very much like a family. People form relationships at a ballpark that are kind of different than any other kind of relationship I can think of. I guess maybe it's because the ballpark is where you come to play. You come to play ball, and everyone comes to play. And so you're in a good mood. Mostly everyone's in a good mood, except the pitchers that get shelled and come into the locker room and turn it upside down. But generally speaking, everybody there is in a good mood. It was always very friendly atmosphere. The players and the people who worked at the ballpark, it's almost like an unreal place in some ways. It was so friendly, and I know that the relationships that were formed there were the kind of relationships that you remember for the rest of your life, because those years in that ballpark were unlike the rest of your life. I mean, that was a very unique time. And I'm sure you knew that outside of the ballpark, I mean, working in a ballpark is like your royalty. Everyone is impressed. That's an amazing thing to work in a ballpark. It's a very special thing that very few people get to experience firsthand. And I know you all know it, listening to the stories here tonight. I know you all have those memories, and that you know how special that was, because no, it's hard to even communicate it to other people, really, what it was like, right? I mean, you hear these stories, and it's kind of like you had to be there. And I feel lucky to have been there to the extent that I was.
That's
baseball in particular. I mean, I've been around a lot of professional sports, and the baseball family. Gary, you could speak to this. It's unique. There's a unique bond and camaraderie, and it's special. It really is. And I mean, I look back and I know how fortunate I was. I know how fortunate you all feel for being a part of that. And obviously, my father had a huge hand in that, and he wouldn't we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. And I know, and I've heard so many stories of what my dad has said and done and helped, and John was one of them. He took John under his wing, and John was a bit of a rebel back in those days. And you know, my dad had some very, very sincere heart-to-heart talks with him, and I know John loved him dearly, and vice versa. So I'm glad you were here, Tom. I'm really glad. I'm glad that you were here to represent the English name. And
well, you know, when John, you mentioned he passed away a few years ago, we had the memorial service for him at Cheney Stadium.
That was a good memorial.
That was pretty cool. That's where he would have wanted to have it. We had it in the lounge there, and we showed family pictures from over the years on the big screen out on the field, and it was a very special day. Sam was there. I think you were out of town. You were in Europe.
Yeah.
Marshall was there, and it was a nice ceremony.
Yeah, it was wonderful.
Well, this was a perfect note to end on. I want to thank every one of you. These stories have been incredible. I've enjoyed it. John, one more.
Yeah, just one more thing that comes to mind as we go through this. And first, I want to thank Mr. Nacarado. Your dad was an amazing man. I won't go into all the stories, but one of the sad days that always happened for me, and I was meant to bring it up when Jimmy was here, was the call-up days. At the season was ending towards the end, and the major leagues could extend their rosters. And I remember, like, Jimmy Van Wyck got called up the first year after he'd come back down to Tacoma. And that was exciting, you know, because he was going back to the big leagues, and he actually did pretty well. But the next year he ended up back in Tacoma, and which I was glad because I love the guy. But then at the end of the season, I was with them that night when they had the call-ups again, and he didn't get called up, and they took some guy from AA or whatever. And you just see these players just in tears, literally, because they're trying to get called up, and now they know they're not getting called up, you know, for their retirements and stuff. And those, I always hated those days. And I remember, especially with Jimmy, after he didn't get called up that second year at the end of the season, and I went home and I was in tears. I felt so bad for those guys. And that was always a tense moment because you had jubilation or just, you know, heartbroken. And they've all got families and things. So that was always a tough day.
Yeah, John, that's an excellent point. You know, also mid-season, that a lot of players would have incentives in their contracts where they got bonuses if they were at AAA and they'd get sent back down. You know, those were really sad, and those usually happened in June or July, that type of thing. So, you know, some of the departures were incredibly happy to see, but some of them, I can remember Greg Bemis, I think, who played at UPS. He quit. He said, "I'm not going back to the bus league." You know, and that was mid-season one year. You probably remember that. So those were always really hard deals, especially if a player got sent down on those things. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, thanks again, guys. This has been really fun. Thanks for the stories. This was a really fun time. This concludes today's edition of the Locker Room Chat, brought to you by the Tacoma Pierce County Sports Museum and Rainier Asphalt and Concrete, the #1 asphalt and concrete repair contractor in Tacoma and Seattle. For quality workmanship, top-notch customer service, contact Rainier Asphalt at rainierasphalt.com. Let them know you heard about them on the Locker Room Chat. Thank you all, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Gary.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks.
Thank you.